Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to do my 14.22 support tier list. If you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards support this patch, mostly focused around nerfing down the top. Poppy, obviously, very much overperforming in the support role at the moment, and then buffing up some of the underperformers. The likes of Swain obviously got his rework, and they wanted to buff him back up because he was obviously very much underperforming in 14.21. But alongside Maokai and Blitz as two of the other buffs, and Vel'Koz as the kind of like one which was already performing relatively well, especially across like mid and low elo. Other nerfs which just affected the support role, Seraphine obviously directly nerfed because of her APC power. She was very strong, probably the premier patch pick of last patch. Alongside that, Silas and Shen both took a bit of a hit, and I got some other things moving about. So let's get into the tier list. The D tier is going to consist of the same champions: MF, Ashe. Both these picks obviously still underperform in their current states. Veigar obviously not like outside of Cage doesn't really have much value of in support. Obviously the other thing is just his damage. You're not really getting a huge amount else out of this champion. Malphite is obviously a bit more gimmicky of a pick, but he can perform within the support role. He does have Harass, and his ultimate is a powerful tool if you're able to utilize it effectively alongside other things. Yumi is the worst performing support just in general. She's not intended to be good. Riot know she's a big frustration and just not a very healthy pick for the game, especially if she's ever decent when she usually sees competitive play, which is just not a good spot for this kind of a champion to be in. She is kept on the weaker side at the moment, does remain within my D tier. And then Ziggs wraps up the D tier picks. He obviously kind of akin to Veigar is mostly just used for his his CC, his W in this case, and his sieging potential. Has a bit less damage accessible. Well, I mean, still does do damage. That is the premier reason why you are playing Ziggs, but still underperformance in a support role. Yeah, I'm honestly surprised he maintains the player base here, but it's more for like combos. Like Veigar Ziggs is one of the combos, which is why both these two champions see play within the support role. Moving on to the C tier event, we've got a couple of champions moving out of here. Well, actually, two are remaining. That is Amumu and Renata. My C tier is going to be relatively small at the moment. Renata's play rate has actually increased quite aggressively. That is primarily because of Worlds. I believe Finals really highlighted Renata's strengths as a champion. It doesn't translate anywhere near as well into solo queue. It wouldn't surprise me if Renata at some point within the next couple of patches receives some sort of treatment to kind of decentivize her from being a pro staple whilst really underperforming in solo queue. Builds are a bit all over the place. We've seen some like Shirelia, some Locket Redemption variants. We've seen like Tank Renata builds in the past. We've seen Enchanter Renata builds in the past. Overall, this pick is just in a bit of a weird spot at the moment. Not something I'd really recommend outside of like specific pairings where you can really utilize her passive and her ability to kind of step up and be more of a higher agency enchanter when you need her, utilizing the Q, the E, the R to really like change the outcome of fights. The main pairing is obviously always going to be Kalista when you're referring to Renata. That is like the pro staple one, and Kalista inherently is a bad, so like low to mid elo solo queue champion. Obviously she still functions very well in an elite and an early aggressive skewed marksman. Does tend to obviously have elite properties, and yeah, that duo just isn't going to really fly, especially in mid and low elo as a consistently winning pair outside of like Smurf situations. In Amumu's case, he does have good CC, he's an easy to play champion, but has very much been decentralized as being played as a support, plus has the issue of just not having great itemization. It's the same thing which really prohibits Galio from being a great support option. It's just that itemization choices in the bot lane just aren't particularly great, and they don't have particularly accessible options outside of like Zeke's for Amumu, for example. He does remain within the C tier for the moment. Plus, he did get nerfed quite aggressively at like 14.20, I believe, or 14.19 rather, and that did hurt him quite a bit for support. Camille is in the B tier. She's basically lost all of her play rate in the support role, and she will probably end up getting taken off at some point. Obviously, she's like Pantheon in a way, where playing around very early aggressive CC into like high damage burst, and then using that to snowball into the game. With Camille, it's like the E into Halo Blades and then rotating that damage. In Pantheon's case, it's just like W with PTA usually, and that is how you snowball lanes. Pantheon's more consistent. easier to play in a lot of situations. Camille is obviously going to be a bit more reliant on her like mechanics, utilizing like the EWs and then like comboing of ultimate and utilizing the isolated pick potential of the champion are all going to be a bit harder to execute oftentimes. So as Pantheon, yeah, utilizing just the W, the Q, and then using the E to block damage. It's all a pretty cookie cutter like playstyle, and there isn't a lot of variance to that in a lot of situations. A lot of the beta, like lower beta picks are obviously some of your staples, like your Nautiluses. It's not a pick which I really recommend at the moment. I think there are solid answers to him, and Nautilus obviously comes out as a very popular blind pick, just for the value of his hook and the point and click CC can are like perceived as being pretty valuable. But he's just not going to be as consistent as some of the other options I have higher up, combined with the fact that I believe he is a bit, I mean, he does just have lower agency than some of the other options which do a bit more damage. You're gonna, like, with these tankier options, be more reliant on, your AD carry to perform well, so you get a lot more value out of these kind of picks. But in most situations, if you're doing and your ADC is very comfortable, then they do increase exponentially in value. Pyke is an elite skewed early game champion, obviously the only assassin really within the support role, unless you're like counting the likes of Pantheon as an assassin, but I'd say he's probably classed more as a skirmisher. Actually, and LeBlanc, I guess, is the other example I would use as like support assassins. Pyke is very elite skewed, very early game, very reliant on hitting hooks and then chaining that together with like Halo Blades attacks and pairing well with like aggressive laners to snowball, create advantages and then close out games. It's just a bit elite skewed. He does, if you are very comfortable on him, increase in rank compared to some of the other options lower down. I don't think he's like capped at like a B tier pick. There is definitely like a lot of potential with a champion like Pyke. Nico is obviously more popular as a support option these days. Her E is a very powerful snare tool. Her early game damage can be very oppressive in lane especially, and her ultimate can be a very powerful team fighting tool. She just isn't performing to the same level as some of the other like AP carry orientated options. Doesn't have the same translatable damage into like mid and late game, whether that's like through just not having the range or artillery, which like a Xerath or a Vel'Koz has, or whether that's the like damage over time, like a Brand or a Zyra. Plus she's a bit, I'd say she's a bit harder to execute than some of these other options, which is why she does sit towards the lower end of the B tier. But she, once again, like Pyke, does have potential to obviously climb the tier list when you have put a lot of games into her. Heimerdinger remains as a B tier pick. He just had a lot of power siphoned out of support role and has, over time become like increasingly unpopular as a support option. He's like Camille levels of unpopular in the support role. I believe mid and top lane Heimerdinger are in very good spots. I think I actually have top lane Heimerdinger as like a high A or maybe even like an S tier pick. I think this champion has a lot of potential in those two roles, especially when you get access to a lot of gold and a lot more AP, which does scale his turrets quite aggressively. In support, outside of like the Ashe pairing, which was like the competitive one which we saw back in like 2022, this pick just isn't really that prevalent in the support role at the moment, and has lost a lot of his early power, which was why he was prevalent here in the first place. Pantheon, I've kind of already discussed. I'd say he's a bit more reliable than Camille. I still don't like Pantheon that much. I think he's a very volatile support and oftentimes is very much reliant on getting the ball going to really become like a viable option here, and will just get outvalued by a lot of the tankier supports if he's not really able to convert any advantage from laning phase. He also is a bit shorter range, and that can definitely be painful into some of the more ranged options, once again if he isn't snowballing. If you get the ball going and you're comfortable in Pantheon, he can be valuable, but I'm going to have him as like a B tier pick for the moment. Karma, I also don't really like Karma that much. She was worse in the past, back when she didn't really have a fallback pattern outside of just like spamming people with malignant Qs. She now does have a lot more power in the E shield, and that can translate later on to the game, but she is still very early game skewed. You do have to provide a lot of value in lane, and oftentimes take that advantage and then utilize that to snowball your items and then convert that into wins within the game. if you're not getting advantages in lane, this pick just it's less valuable than like every other enchanter in the game, and it's just not going to output the same level of damage as once again on some of your more artillery focused options. I think that really prohibits her from being like a higher tier support. I think if she had more shielding later into the game, then she would definitely climb, and yeah, that fallback pattern becomes a lot more viable and is actually one of the better options for her. And you could honestly like lean more towards like an echo of Helia's version, but she's not quite there yet, and you're still looking at like your malignance and then utilizing that to really convert into advantages in your mid and late game. Thresh is a very unreliable pick, and oftentimes if you have the advantage and you pick him in the right spots and you're comfortable in the champion, he can be valuable. Like, Thresh is a very high skill ceiling support, and like good lanterns and good hooks can oftentimes be the decider between winning the game and losing the game. But his ultimate's just been progressively more and more devalued over time. Like, other champions have either come out or just had their ultimates buffed, and Thresh is a bit on the weaker side at the moment. He very much is reliant on shorter range compositions to make full use of that, combined with like Flay, for example. Into long range, you oftentimes just get harassed out before the fight really opens, but you can still get value out of hooks. So like center lanes are still usually favourable towards the likes of Thresh, and he is obviously a very popular support, but I think he's kind of prohibited from like the A and the S tier by oftentimes skill, and if you have that skill, then yeah, he will climb the tier list, once again, a lot of the other champions down here. Teemo is obviously a bit more of a gimmicky pick, but he can still very much function as a support option. Into double range, he can be very valuable. Rakan, obviously, has also seen a lot of competitive play. I believe he also saw a decent amount of competitive play towards the latter end of this year. I don't think he's in one of the best spots he's been in. Like, for solo queue, he's probably relatively weak to like your old like Radiant Virtue Rakans, and he didn't fit into the Warmorg's meta of support that well compared to a lot of the other options. But in the current kind of state of the game, he is fine. He's a good option. If you're comfortable on Rakan, you will get results. He pairs nicely with the likes of Xayah. Obviously, Twitch being bad does hurt him, because that was one of the other duos which he could function with quite nicely, and Twitch is like, yeah, the worst ADC in the game at the moment in his current state. But Rakan's good. Like, if you're able to get results, then he can, yeah, definitely be a very viable way to climb. Same goes for Bard. He does have a lot of upfront damage, and Bard can be very scary if ever ahead or in a very controlling lane state. I do think he lacks a bit of consistency to some of the other options, and once again, you're not really going to see Bard outside of like OTPs of the champion. But if you're utilizing his E and R effectively, like the tools which don't do damage within his kit, and you're using his movement effectively, his ult for like blocking rifts or like setting up good plays, then he can be a very valuable champion, especially with the upfront damage he has with like his passive combined with his Q, and then like an electrocute maybe paired alongside that, or some of the other runes with like your guardians and your fleets can be a bit more defensive and still have a lot of value. So Bard, I think is a solid B tier. Not really, yeah, like once again, can definitely climb the tier list if you put a lot of time into the champion. Zoe mostly plays around her bubble in support and like her early game harass. She does have a lot of upfront damage, and if you're able to get a lot of gold, she can be very powerful as a support option. Doesn't scale very well with levels, which helps support Zoe, so once again, more value there, but she does require consistent landing of rotations of skill shots. If you're not getting kills, this pick will lose so much value compared to some of the other options. But if you're into good matchups, you're consistently rotating bubbles onto like squishy targets, which you can just isolated 1v1 kill, then she can be a very valuable champion. Alistar remains in the B tier. He's like a low B tier option. I'm not a huge fan of Alistar in his current state. I think he's slightly weak. He kind of sits like near Nautilus, where they are your standard support options. Like, you want an engage pick, then usually Alistar will be one of the ones which comes to mind. He is shut down by Poppy, who is, it's probably still number one support. I'll talk about it in a minute, though. She was supposed to get nerfed this patch. But Alistar, yeah, it kind of sits as like a low beta option. He can still function as a good engage pick, and if you're comfortable on Alistar, then you can get results. But he's just not going to be as reliable as some of the A and the S tier options. Plus, I wouldn't really recommend picking him into a lot of the S tier. They tend to be very oppressive into him and like mitigate his engage in a lot of circumstances. Morgana, I know Morgana support is a pretty, like, people don't like it for the W, and, like, rightfully so. That ability just becomes kind of useless in the support role. The main thing you're playing around is just her Q and Black Shield. If you can consistently land Qs and you have the setup for this ability, she can be very valuable, and if you can get, like, good Black Shield value within a game, then, and, like, you pair these two things together, she can be very, very valuable in those situations. Is she blindable? No, you cannot blind Morgana. She is very susceptible to, like, specific champions. She also like very much relies on both those things coming together to have value within the game. Like, you can pick Morgana into like a Nautilus if you have the setup for Qs and you're able to like make like get value out of her in the rest of the game. She can definitely function in those situations, but yeah, she's more reliant on being a counter pick. Is she recommendable at the moment? Probably not, but she's definitely not bad, especially with like some of the Leandri's builds and just being more accessible HP within the game, which she does like function well into. Hui and Seraphine still remain as B tier picks. Hui obviously has an arsenal of tools accessible to him, which can be very valuable. He is a bit harder to pilot than some of the other options, which kind of prohibits him from the higher tiers. I think he's like an A tier generalistically. The lower down you go, the more he does sink down. But he's still, yeah, got a lot of damage within his kit. Is a bit more of a level scaler than some of the other support options, which does make him a bit weaker here. But the WW shield strength going up in the previous patch did help him in the support role, even though they ended up nerfing him more recently on the E cooldown and the Q damage. In Seraphine's case, she got nerfed this patch. It takes her from like the top of the B tier to more like a mid to low B tier pick. She was a good support, and now she's a slightly less good support. She does obviously do damage and has a lot of CC within the kit, combined with like her enchanter functionalities. She's like a jack of all trades, and she can definitely still have prevalence in the support role. She does sit more like as more like a low B2 option. Galio should be a good support. I think this pick has so much potential at the moment as like a top, mid, and support option. The problem is his itemization is just really bad here, and that really prohibits him from being a good support pick in the current state of the game. Hollow Radiance is his main rush item, obviously both mid and top traditionally, and you don't really want a Barmy's item as a support, and that just really prohibits him from his viability here. Is he still a standalone good champion, even with slightly weaker itemization? Yeah, I still think he's a good B tier pick. Just the itemization, really limits him from the higher tiers at the moment. Blitzcrank is moving up. I'm going to put him from the C tier to the B tier. He gained a bit of power with the E damage going up, like a very minimal amount, but he was like a high C tier pick, so yeah, he sits as more like a low B tier pick now. If you're landing like consistent hooks, he can be the game-winning champion, but there are picks at the moment which I'd say just have a bit too many tools and like can still have a value as like support options if you're like, even if you do fall slightly behind, whether that's like you're getting hooked in laning phase, or they just have the tools to answer the hook, like they have a response, like Braum just ease for hook, and like suddenly you've hooked someone who's tanky into your team, and you provide him the setup to land a good ultimate. Like, that's in situations where Blitzcrank can just be consistently devalued, and I think he just got over nerfed in previous patches, and like this is a slight pullback of those nerfs, probably still not enough, so he sits as like a low B tier champion. The A tier then, Swain and Maokai go from the C tier to the A tier. Both of them received really big buffs this patch, and it really helped them. Maokai gained some base health and some movement speed, which are like the two main things you'd want as a support, so he gained a lot of power out of that. He is now a viable support option. In Swain's case, they buffed, like, they've over buffed him. He's too strong in the bot lane. He's probably too strong in mid lane long term. Do I think he'll be nerfed in 14.24? Yeah, probably. But if you enjoy Swain, he is in a very strong spot for support. Well, he is in a good spot for support. I still think support is his weakest role out of the four. Maybe top is like competitive, like support. Actually, I'd say top's still weaker. Support is probably his second weakest role. He still outputs a lot of damage if you're able to consistently like hold people within your ultimate, and being able to recast that can be rewarding if you do end up cycling it. Obviously, in support, you're getting access to less gold, so you're going to be less tanky. Thus, you're usually going to not be able to get a recast of ultimate, but there is still more damage within his Q now. He's a bit more tanky with the buffs he received, and he's a solid A tier pick, and if you pick him in the right spots, he can be a game-winning support option. Continuing on with the other A tier picks, and we have Sona and Soraka, who are two of the enchanters, which I recommend as like A tier options. Sona, obviously, in time, over time, I'd say she's actually dropped considerably, and she probably sits as more like a high B, low A tier option now. Like, she is the lowest A tier pick I have, but there is no doubt that she does have incredible value when you hit like your breakpoint on the passive, combined with the healing and the shielding output she can have access to, and like obviously the movement speed is nothing to be like it's still a very valuable part of her kit. Her ultimate, still, yeah, great tool, especially once you get the passive fully stacked, and then you can rotate alt off CD, looking for those picks. Would I say she probably lacks like the full kit? Like she just doesn't have the I'll just go like the ultimate is underwhelming compared to like the likes of Seraphine. Like that is always gonna be the comparison you draw. Is Sona's kit feels less than Seraphine, even though Sona's numbers are higher at the moment. I'd say Sona just has more value in that space. Seraphine obviously is going to output a bit more damage and has more CC within her kit. Yeah, Sona's numbers are a bit higher at the moment. She does sit as like a low A tier pick. I think you could logically put her in the B tier. And like if you enjoy Sona, then yeah, she can still be very valuable. In Soraka's case, she is still the go-to heal support. Like if you want a champion with a lot of healing, enemy team maybe has a hard time picking up heal cut, anti-heal, then yeah, she can be really valuable in those spots. Paired alongside the likes of an Ashe in lane, she can be a very potent champion. Do I think she's the best pick or like one of the better enchanters at the moment? Probably not. I think she sits as like a good above average option. And if you find the right spots, then yeah, with a lot of these picks, you can still get a good amount of value and oftentimes win the game. Zilean sits as a low A tier pick. I think this pick has been better in the past, but he still has an incredible kit, whether that's like the Q based damage or the rotation of slows and speed ups. There are certain champions which he can really comfortably synergize with, which can really amplify his potential within the game. As a standalone support, I think he sits as more like a low A tier option. Fiddlesticks is a very gimmicky support, but he can still definitely be very powerful and has the opportunity to provide game-winning ultimates. Obviously, if people are aware of the power and potency of the support, they will play around it and he will lose a lot of value, and then that engaged like option is just not going to be there in a lot of spots, especially if like the ultimate is just too telegraphed and people do respond to it. But oftentimes that's just not going to happen in low elo, and I do think he is a very solid A tier pick, especially with like the point and click CC. That does have a lot of value. Sidus moves down from the A tier to the B tier. The Narcissus patch to his health growth do just make him a little less durable, and he was a low A tier pick, and now I'd say he's like a high B tier pick in the support role. He still very much functions here. Just gonna be a bit more counter pick reliant, like sealing away 2 good ults in the bot lane can be very valuable for him now. Vel'Koz moves to the high end of the A tier. I think he's probably the highest A tier pick now. I'm not quite comfortable moving him up to the S tier. I think he still has his issues of just not having mobility, and being very vulnerable to dive can be very punishing as Vel'Koz. But there's like having access to his cooldowns more often now, when they were they were quite long and now they're considerably shorter, like having more uptime on E, having more access to ultimate. Very powerful. And ultimate in fact can be used consistently to just chunk people out now rather than as a finisher. Obviously you still want to kill people with it, but you do have access to it more often now, which is very powerful. Xerath is still a good artillery option. I'd actually have Vel'Koz over Xerath now. But Xerath, if you're comfortable on him, is still one of the best supports in the game for damage output, and his artillery, if you're ahead of the curve, is very potent, kind of akin to a Lux. I have Lux slightly higher up at the moment, but I think Lux is really good in her current state. LeBlanc is still a great assassin option. If you can get good roams and you're good at executing this pick, she is a very potent support option. Also sits towards the higher end of the A tier. Zac, his CC, his damage are both very powerful tools. Does have the problem of not having great itemization at the moment. That is kind of what a lot of these tankier non-traditional supports have, where not having a Radiant Virtue or an Even Shroud does hurt them. But Zac's numbers are quite high at the moment, and he's very strong in the top lane, decently strong in the mid lane, well actually very strong in the mid lane, probably overpowered in the mid lane, just no one plays him. Average in the jungle, above average in the jungle, but he is being nerfed in 14.23. That will hurt him. Probably dropping down to the B tier in the support role, but he's still a great option at the moment. So yeah, deserves a spot in the A tier. Milio also going to be in the A tier. He's like a mid to high end enchanter option in his current state, but a bit more reliant on synergies and like matchup dependent, but yeah, still a very good enchanter option, especially now that there's a bit more damage within his kit on the Q, and which was like the last thing they buffed, and then his E does have a bit more aggressive of an AP ratio, just making him a bit more solo Q skewed, so he doesn't like suddenly become like a pick ban option in competitive. They did that preemptively, so yeah, that didn't end up happening, fortunately. In Bomb's case, he's obviously a great counter pick option, great into engage, pretty bad into enchanters. That is the main thing for Borm. Like if every game was an engage, against an engage support, he would be the best support pick in the game. Actually, Poppy might still have the edge over him slightly, but he would be one of the best support picks in the game. But obviously, enchanters do hurt him, forces him to come out as a counter pick traditionally. And yeah, in those situations where you do get him as a counter pick, he is a very potent support and can oftentimes shut down most engages and then have a good response in the ultimate and then sacking the passive. Shaco is also a very niche support option, but still very good. Like, Shaco support is probably better at the moment than Shaco jungle, and AP Shaco support is a very good controller, and his traps are some of the most powerful within the game, especially into melee picks, which just can't destroy his traps without activating them. That is a very powerful tool he has access to, and yeah, he's a great A tier pick in his current state. Leona and Rao are two of the other engage options. I'd have them as a slight tier above the likes of Nautilus and Blitzcrank and Pyke, for example. I'd actually separate Pyke from that lot. But yeah, Leona, Rao, great CC chains, like have some of the most CC within the game. Just provides them with like general value. Their damage is a bit lower. They have tried to tackle that, but has been like what a lot of the nerfs have been directed towards, combined with making them a bit more punishable within lane. Leona lost some base armor. I believe Rel lost some movement speed on E, which yeah does hurt them a bit, but they are still very good A tier options, and yeah, can abuse a lot of the good support items at the moment, which yeah, some of the other options don't really want. Some of the other tanks just don't really want as consistently. And then the likes of Tarek still also sit as high A tier options. This pick is probably still pretty close to the S tier. If you can like pair him with good synergies, then he does massively increase in value. Obviously, Tarek Nyla is one of the ones which comes to mind. And if you pick him into champions, which obviously have to play into you, and you can get value out of the E and the ultimate, then he also does really well in those situations. Also, another champion like Braum, which is weak into enchanters and traditionally comes out as more of a counter pick. And then Brand. Brand is still one of the best, if not the... I mean, it's probably Brand and Zyra, which I would say are the two damage over time options you have as support. They have good agency. Obviously, Brand got nerfed more recently, which is why he's like a tier below Zyra, I would say, in his current state. But he's still very good if you pick him and you're able to consistently rotate abilities and then, yeah, really potent in team fights. It mostly just comes down to comfort and like how comfortable you are on this champion. He does have more value in lower elo, but it's just something to be aware of. But he can still have value into like masters comfortably, but will begin to devalue once you like carve through masters. Moving on to the S tier, actually there are two champions dropping down for the S tier. So we have Senna and we have Shen. Senna, I probably should have moved down last patch, but I ended up being a bit hesitant. She still has the two good build variants. Like, I don't think Senna is bad by any means. Like, your Cleaver Senna and your Echoes of Helia Senna both can function really nicely as support options, depending on what you need within the game. She just has lost a decent amount of agency over time, and the nerf to her armor really did hurt her quite a bit, especially into some of those more volatile matchups. Pyke is a must ban on Senna at this point. That champion will heavily answer you and oftentimes just make it really hard for you to consistently harass and play the game in lane. In Shed's case, then after this patch just brought him down a tier. It moves him from the S tier to the A tier. He's still a very good pick into the likes of Leona and champions which also do need to play into you, and then weaker into Enchanter, kind of akin to Braum and Tarek. The S tier then, so we have a couple of picks here. We have Janna, who is still a great enchanter, alongside the likes of Lulu and Nami, who I'd say are my free enchanter core, as like the ones I'd recommend people go to at the moment. Nami has great synergies with like more of the AP champions than the other two. Like the other two preferably don't want to play with AP champions or have anti-synergy in a lot of situations. Nami is the one which can oftentimes play with them. She's great setup with the ultimate and the Q. Her damage is quite high with like just from her kit, and that can be a very powerful tool to have. In Lulu's case, she's great with hyper carries, oftentimes being able to utilize the attack speed on W and the ultimate to and shield to provide a lot of safety and a lot of functional damage that can be really valuable. And then Janna really values champions which value raw AD and being able to come in more as a counter pick into heavy dive where you can utilize the Q and the ultimate as peel tools. All three of these chances have good spots and can be really valuable as additions to a specific team comps, and these coming out can be the difference maker. Other picks here, we have Poppy, who is still, actually, I'll talk about Poppy last. Zyra is still probably the best damage over time option support. Her kit did get nerfed a while ago when they did the Zyra jungle nerf, but she's still a very good support option. Overall, champions having access to more health at the moment has definitely benefited her, especially if she's picking up the likes of a Leandry, and just that damage can really build up and provide so much value in team fights. Combined with the ultimate and then the plants for CC, she's a very potent champion in her current state. Does fall off quite aggressively with Elo though. You're going to be rewarded less for well, actually, you're going to not consistently find the damage you find more in low elo. Like, people will destroy your plants, they will not get hit by your CC and move out of the zone control she has, which will definitely punish her quite a bit more the higher up you go. Lux is still a great support option, pairing really nicely with Caitlyn at the moment. Obviously, Caitlyn's in a really good spot, so Lux definitely does come out a bit more. The CC, the damage, the harass she has in lane, the artillery capability just makes her a really potent option here. The biggest concern with Lux is obviously the lack of mobility, combined with the, if you fall behind, she does really struggle quite a bit more, but she's still a very powerful support. Tarp Kedge, I really value this pick at the moment. He is being nerfed next patch, but primarily his AP, but actually almost entirely his AP builds. If you do pick up a Dark Seal, you will lose some damage. That is just going to happen, but if you're playing full tank, like your Heart Steel, Spirits, Unending Despair, it's untouched. You are still going to be a very potent support option. And then Poppy, they failed to nerf her. They took away 4 base AD, gave it back to her in base attack speed, and then that basically just meant she traded neutral as a support option. They wanted to do this so that jungle and top lane Poppy stayed relevant as good options. They didn't want to just nerf Poppy across the board, and it didn't do enough. She still remains as number 1 support option, probably the S+ pick of the patch in her current state, and but she's not being nerfed in 40.23, so she will still be the pick I recommend for support at the moment. Obviously, she does come in more of a counter pick these days, and that is definitely going to be, she's not going to be as good into enchanters as she was in the past when she was just blatantly as overpowered, but she's still overpowered, and she can still definitely function in those matchups. You're just probably going to get more value out of some of the other options of the S tier than maybe Poppy, but Poppy is still the best all-rounder. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next one. Goodbye.